Hello everyone, it's me, Con from Seafoam Gaming, back again with the next Eternal Memories episode. One that's a year overdue, if not more, because today I'm talking about my top 10 favorite games of the last decade. And yeah, that means technically I could throw 2020's best game in there too, but I end up making an article on my best and worst games of last year on my website, the seafoamgaming.com website, for reviews and stuff. So I'm not including that here because I want to focus on my original plan, which was to focus on games I grew up with and looked fondly at over the decade. And that includes games I didn't play during the year they came out, but ended up coming back and loving them anyway. So here's the deal, since this is the top 10 and I've stopped doing top 10s for the Lear, like Game the Lear on the videos because I got tired of that. I just want to do some more very top 10s, like I have ideas for top 10 Pokemon, top 10 arcade games, top 10 soundtracks, intro themes, etc. So this is one of my ideas, just doing a best of the decade. So yeah, like usual, I usually do it in a simple way where I exclude certain things such as no arcade archives, no virtual console, straight port re-releases. Gaming compilations are valid, of course, especially if they have lots of stuff to call their own, but like just nothing but a straight port on the digital storefront, I won't cover it. If it's an enhanced port or late re-release, I will cover it and count it as part of the I played that re-release. So it really depends. But yeah, unlike most lists you'll see, I'm not even excluding games down the same series or sub-series. If I like a game enough that both entries show up in the best of the decade, then it'll stay because those were the best of the decade. So here's how it works. I'm not gonna wink until the very end my best to worst games of the decade. Instead, I'm just gonna go year by year, talking about the one up for I think would be the best game of that year, and then my favorite game of that year. And it goes one year up from 2010 to 2019. So it's pretty simple. I'll just talk, reminisce, look back, and show off games I either discovered later after they came out, or when they were new, I liked them and I still like them today. And then at the end, I will rank them accordingly, though you should not be surprised by number 1 if you know me because you will see it coming a mile away. Still, that's why I'm hoping to make this both not just the best, but some honorable mentions because you may find something new to play, or enjoy, or both. So with that said, let's start with the year 2010. Kicking off the decade with the year 2010, I actually didn't really do much gaming back then besides Nintendo stuff and just stuck to my Nintendo DS. The US version of Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out and I enjoyed Heart Gold immensely, but since I imported Soul Silver the year prior, it wasn't a new experience for me and I don't think I can really count that because of it. So in all honesty, my picks for this year came from games that did launch in 2010, which I didn't know about until years later, and I wish I managed to play these when they were new. And this game is no exception, as the runner-up for 2010 is none other than Ys Ofenfelgana. While this originally launched on PC computers in Japan years prior, 2010 was when the US got a translated version of the remake of Ys 3 via the PSP, part of a new attempt from Xseed to get Falcom's games localized in the West. And it's a very fun remake that completely changes the genre and expands on the original in so many ways. I honestly wish other remakes would try this approach rather than just copying their originals one-to-one. Looking at Mystery Dungeon DX as one of my hopes for that. Definitely recommend picking this up on the PC if you haven't already, since it's easily the definitive version. As for my 2010 game of the year, that's none other than the Zelda-inspired 3D Dot Game Heroes, also known as the only From Software game I ever have interest in and forever will have interest in checking out. Yeah, I know it's not technically developed by them, but there's a whole difficulty mode named after the notorious difficulty, and it's just a fun game to play with. You can customize your own characters, mess around with them, and explore this fun top-down world with lots of collectibles to enjoy, and just a great experience. I still haven't beaten this yet, but it's definitely the game from 2010 that impresses me the most, and mark my words, I will beat this game at 100% completion, and maybe in the Splunker bonus mode too, which I'm even shocked they retained the Western release considering how such a niche game that was mainly known in Japan rather than here where it just became a bargain bin. I'm kinda bummed there's no sequel to this day, but at least the devs of this underrated gem continue to make good games to this day, though if you want to buy this game, you can't go on the PSN because it never came out there, so you have to find a physical copy, and even though the store shutdown was averted, you still have to deal with high prices for this game because it's only available in physical media. On to the year of 2011. This was when I finally started paying attention to third-party games thanks to 3DS's bad launch lineup. And while I was still Nintendo only at this point in time when it came to systems, my horizons in games opened up a lot, so the two games representing this year were indeed titles I grew up with back when they came out. So the runner-up for 2011's Game of the Year is none other than an excellent port of Ocarina of Time 3D. This was single-handedly the biggest motivator for me purchasing a 3DS on day one, and while it took 3 months for the game to actually come out, it was worth the wait. Taking the original N64 game I grew up and loved, Ocarina of Time 3D gave a complete makeover that was absolutely gorgeous in 3D. Definitely a great showcase of the system's effect, and when the new 3DS came out years later, I happily replayed the game once again to admire the 3D in all its glory. Even better, Ocarina 3D even includes a Master Quest version of the game, making it the perfect way to experience the remixed version of this adventure, and the ultimate version overall. They even weren't allowed to keep cool speedrun tech in this game, and new mechanics even allow you to do cool stuff. But for my Game of the Year in 2011, it was an oddball. It's not Pokemon White, even though I had good fun with it, nor was it Pushmo, even though it was a good early eShop game, but rather, it was the worst version of a godly fighting game, in the form of BlazBlue Continuum Shift 2. Now my exposure to this game was really peculiar, for I stumbled upon the trailer on the 3DS eShop one day in the summer, heard the godly intro music, and went on a hunt for this fighter in my vacation cabin, an area with not many game stores around us. And it was also freaking hard to find back then, being a low-printed game on the 3DS back in the day, in the first few months of its lifespan, launching in May. I had to go from store to store to store before I finally found a copy at Best Buy during my vacation cabin trip to Minnesota. But once I popped in the game to my 3DS and gave the fighting system a shot, I was addicted. Super Street Fighter 4 on 3DS was a lot of fun for me too, but BlazBlue was even better than that in my regards. Because it was just more stylish, the characters were fun, the story mode was super engaging and kept me to the edge of my seat, and the music was godly. Lots and lots of intense combat themes that made me ready to battle, so many soundtrack-worthy songs. It was just outstanding, and the 3DS version ran at a pretty good frame rate. But it did have some weird quirks, like the lack of sleep mode and other bugs, that makes this way worse than the PSP version. In fact, you can't even play local multiplayer because it'll always desync on you if you try to do so, as I found out when I managed to get my friend in and have his own copy of the game. That was a crushing disappointment, and it really shows this version was just not really looked that well, but it still played good on the 3DS, and I do enjoy my time with it. Now an even bigger version is on the PC and Vita if you want to give the expanded Extend version a shot. That's the way to go to experience this flashy anime fighter. As for the 3DS version I grew up with, you can't erase the save data from the cartridge unless you use Homebrew to nuke the 3DS's save file. And since this never got an eShop release here in the States, good luck finding an affordable new copy if you don't want to use Homebrew to wipe out an old save. I sold mine long ago because I was an idiot, so I can't show you it, and that's why the off-screen camera footage you're watching is from my Vita version I bought. The year of 2012 came around next, and despite worrying about the end of the world before finding out it was just a stupid old religious thingamajiggy, this was the debut of the Wii U. I was still a Nintendo-only game at this point, and generally the first-party output this year was very weak on both 3DS and Wii U. So none of their games made onto my list this year, but rather, two third-party gems made my picks for this year, so let's get into both of them. First is the runner-up, which was by far the game I was most addicted to this year, and that was Theatrhythm Final Fantasy. In the summer of 2012, I had a split-second decision to choose between Kingdom Hearts 3D and Theatrhythm, both being franchises I had no prior experience with, save for a brief demo chain of memories when I was a kid on the Game Boy Advance, and some time with Final Fantasy VI on the Wii. So I chose the Rhythm game because Final Fantasy VI's music was good enough for me that I thought it would be worth the risk. And I'm so glad I made that risk, because this game was super addicting. Not only were some of my favorite songs from Final Fantasy VI available, but songs from future favorites of mine were there to play as well. From Final Fantasy 2, 7, 9, the first 13 were all here on the count for, and DLC added even more songs from those games, along with a cool song from what was then known as Final Fantasy Vs. 13. That didn't even return the sequel, so if you technically want to get technical, that song is the only reason to buy this game now, for a reason I'll mention later. Easily over 100 hours was dumped into this rhythmic game over the summer, and I became a Final Fantasy addict out of it. So what could possibly surpass a wonderful franchise introduction, celebrating 25 years of an established franchise? How about a miraculous Metroidvania release? Indeed, La Mulana's remake launched on WiiWare that fall, and I bought it day one to support how EnjoyUp saved the game from Nicalis' dirty hands, for they had cancelled the WiiWare version months before without telling the developers. There was a big long story about why Nicalis is outed as a racist company that doesn't really treat their developers well, or their IPs for that matter. So this was a scary situation. At the time, everyone was mad at them because they cancelled the Wii version. But EnjoyUp came to save the day, and I gave it a go. While my first attempt at a playthrough hit a wall really quickly, I still enjoyed the open-ended nature of this Metroidvania, and how I could go basically anywhere I wanted to if I just thought hard enough to do so. And after giving the Vita version a go years later, I finally completed a game. And since then, I bought it for many platforms and have beaten it more times than I can count. That leads to La Mulana being one of the finest Metroidvanias I've ever played, with sequence-breaking potential like no other Metroidvania out there. Cryptic hints, fun boss fights, cool secrets, this game has it all, and it was easily my favorite game to come out of 2012 by far, even it took me a few years to appreciate it. So the Wii original is long gone, but the Steam version's good, and the current gen versions are still worth a purchase. And they include everything the Wii version had, plus more, since the DLC didn't come out in our shores back then, but now it's part of every single version of La Mulana remake. It's worth giving a go, and I recommend you give this challenging Metroidvania a go as well. Now we arrived to the year I finally started to try other consoles besides Nintendo systems, with 2013. I finally decided to try out Steam Gaming on my Mac, and while my access to third-party stuff was very limited, I was more open-minded to giving non-Nintendo systems a shot. This year, we are still focused on handheld territory, with both the PlayStation Vita and 3DS taking my spotlight. The one-up should come both as no surprise, and a bit of one at the same time, for it's none other than the 3DS RPG, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates of Infinity. As the fourth installment in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon franchise, this was the first game in 3D, and I still remember me and my best friend rushing to GameStop to buy our copies on launch day, and kicking back to enjoy this new adventure. I even got my first 3DS XL with the game to form this Pikachu 3DS, and I had a brilliant time with this game. The story here is so magnificent, and a huge step up from the previous game for me. But the gameplay was a bit simplified, too much for my liking, and the Magna Gate gimmick was kinda stupid and ran out quickly. I'll cover this all more in depth when we reach that chapter in that retrospective, and yes, it's still being worked on, I promise. But for the most part, this was my game to leave for a long time due to the story alone. But preferences change as you get older, and another game that came out later this year eventually caught my eye and made me jealous I didn't own a Vita back then, and that was a remake of Ys 4, known as Ys Memories of Celceta. If Ulf and Felghana showed what a remake that took the same story and heavily remixed it could do, then Memories of Celceta showed what a remake that took the same world and goes wild with new ideas can be. The combat system's just so much fun to enjoy, and when I finally got my hands on this game, I had an utter blast with this action RPG adventure. Godly music, a new reimagined take on one of my favorite Ys games, and a great combat system all led to a super enjoyable action game, and I managed to finally 100% this gem of the game on my Vita last fall. Yet nowadays, I recommend you pick up the PS4 or Steam versions of this game, since they run at 60 FPS, and once you play that way, you can't really go back to the Vita version on anything but the Vita screen itself because it's just so much different. If 2013 was the year of me giving Steam Gaming a try, then 2014 is when I finally left the world of Nintendo consoles and gave Sony a shot with the PlayStation TV in late 2014. But the 3DS ended up being the MVP of my year anyways, with two amazing games that are very difficult to pick between. Nevertheless, here are the two choices for 2014. The year I started my review website, then known as Pokemon Battlezone, which was stupid. But now it's Seafoam Gaming, which you're watching right now. For the runner-up, it's none other than Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, a Metroidvania that's just easily the best in the Shantae franchise to this day. Fun power-ups, perfect pacing, and just the perfect length. This is a good Metroidvania by itself, but made more of an impression on me by being a good speedrunning game too.
Seriously, once I started learning some speedrunning tech, I blazed through the game, and this became a guilty pleasure of mine, improving my personal best until I unlocked every secret image on the Switch version of the game. The 3DS original is still really good as well, but it's also great in HD, like the PS4 and Xbox, so take the pick on whatever version you want to go with if you decide to give it a spin. But for my game of the year, that would be none other than Final Fantasy Digital Curtain Call. The original Digital made me a fan of Final Fantasy, but Curtain Call was released after I had beaten 6 and played several other games in the Final Fantasy series, so I had more nostalgia for it back then. So many more songs were added, and spin-offs were thrown into the mix now as well. Even oddball Square games like Live a Live, Seiken, and Saga and Chrono Trigger got excellent song picks to complement the already massive starting library. In my firm opinion, this outright replaces the original Digital Rhythm and makes it meaningless, and is easily the best rhythm game on the 3DS hands down. Do not miss out on this game if you haven't checked it out already. Just go for it already. The day this gets ported to Switch directly or gets a proper sequel is the day I can jump for joy, because this is an amazing game and an amazing series that needs to continue. 2015 was more of a boring year, as the Wii U was dying a slow, horrible death, and the 3DS was just dragging its feet, not knowing what to even release on it. Anyone who knows me already knows what my game of the year is, and even the game of the decade, which is why I'm not really ranking these so far. So let's just get to it. Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon is not only my favorite game of 2015, and my favorite 3DS game, but to this day, my favorite video game of all time. And of course, as I mentioned, my favorite game of the decade as a result. Took everything I loved about Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and magnified those elements to a million, with an even better story, the best soundtrack in the series, and just a gaudy experience I can't wait to gush about in my retrospective. It's definitely worth the praise I gave it. So let's move on to a game that isn't expected. The one-up of 2015, none other than Gunman Clive 2. In a year where I would review tons of indie games for Seafoam Gaming, this was the one that sticks out to me years later. A sequel to a fun, budget 3DS platformer, Gunman Clive 2 is still an excellent follow-up to that game, after all this time, with great level design, multiple playable characters, and a short campaign that never overstays its welcome, but is replayable enough that every few years do come back and enjoy it again and again. By itself, it's worth picking up on the 3DS due to the excellent 3D effect, but it's also available as part of a bundle with the first game on several platforms, and that's easily the best bargain for the game. If you like Contra-inspired games, this is worth a shot for sure. 2016 was both a dark year and a good year. Dark for my Nintendo-loving self, since those systems just crapped the bed hard this year. But this was when I finally got not only a PS3, but a PS4 too, opening a whole new world of entertainment to me. The very first game I bought and played on my PS4 is my one-up for this year. Rising Star Games published a great remake of the retro action game Assault Suit Lanos, also known as Target Earth, and it wowed me big time. As a huge fan of Cybernator, playing this remake of the predecessor was a huge joy for me. Although the difficulty still remains as crushing as the original and makes it hard to get into and even complete, I had fun trying again and again to beat the game and improve my scores, and unlocking extra bonus stuff. The fact you could play with the original Genesis music was very admirable, and I really wish they'd remake Cybernator in the same fashion. It may not be the expected first thing someone would buy on a PS4, but for me, it was well worth the system purchase. As for the game of the year this time around, the 3DS and Wii U didn't totally fail on offering me fun, for my favorite game of the year debuted for those systems as a cross-buy indie game. Mutant Mudds Super Challenge from Renegade Kid just hit every single note I love from a retro throwback perfectly. Excellent music, great pixel art, and most importantly, good level design. The original Mutant Mudds was a super fun game that got a big update eventually, but felt too easy for my liking, and it lacked some stuff I wish it could have included. But Super Challenge literally fixed all of my problems with the original by not only making it challenging, yet fair, but also adding a bunch of cool cameo characters from all sorts of indie games, along with really fun boss fights for the first time ever in the series. As a sequel to a pretty good eShop gem, Super Challenge shows not just how a sequel can take feedback from the original game and use it to make truly something excellent, but also shows how, well, just refining what you made before can lead to a better experience. This game is now available on a few more platforms right now, so if you haven't tried it yet, please go and do so. It still holds up 5 years later, and I just did a fun replay of it last year on my Switch, and I still stand by a perfect score I gave it on my website all those years ago. It's easily my favorite game from 2016, and one I hope they make a sequel to someday soon. 2017. The Leah Nintendo released the Nintendo Switch, and I did not care for it much at all at launch. Launching with a Zelda game that felt very un-Zelda-like in all the wrong ways for me, and not having a virtual console really dampened my enjoyment of the console for over a year. So 2017 was mostly dedicated to my PS4, which really offered the goods for me. The 1-Up was indeed a game I played on PS4 first, before buying on Switch later down the line, and that's none other than SteamWorld Dig 2. I got a review copy for this game and didn't think much of it at first, but once I gave it another go a few months later, everything clicked. The fun tools, the satisfying gameplay loop of mining for minerals and repeating the gameplay cycle to improve the gear, and the super creative level design all blend together to offer a super fun Metroidvania that's worth the time. And even if you didn't care much for the original SteamWorld Dig's randomness, it improves on every aspect imaginable for that game and gets rid of the randomness, so you'll have a lot more fun here. While I've replayed the SteamWorld Dig original game only once, I've gladly replayed this entry twice, and the first replay managed to be a deathless one, something I feel very accomplished about. Even now, I consider this to be the best of SteamWorld games, and I hope and pray a third installment ups the ante even more, and shows up sooner rather than later. Shout out to Fire Emblem Echoes being another good game I discovered from this year too, but I didn't want to put it on the list because it felt just barely below SteamWorld Dig 2's highs, so I'm just throwing a nod to that. But you know me, I'm the Ys fanatic, so it's obvious the game of the year for me is none other than the brilliant Ys 8. Technically, I imported this game from my Vita a year before, just due to not being able to contain my hype, but the PS4 version launched worldwide this year. It was the first year the English version was released, and the PS4 version is the one that's on the list, so I'm putting it here. Despite a rough translation at first, Falcom managed to make a godly action game that took the best from memories of Celceta and made it into a super ambitious and spacious action RPG adventure, with so much fun exploration, dungeon crawling, monster slaying, and side quests to take up, all in gorgeous 60 FPS action on PS4. This version adds some extra content that the Vita one didn't have, and the bare frame rate alone makes the PS4 or PC versions the ones to pick up. Though the Switch one does have all the PS4 content, but 30 frames per second, for better or worse. I'm still taking my time to try and 100% this game on PS4 before I give Ys 9 a shot, but I'm still confident saying this was the most fun I had for a game in all 2017, and is easily the best of the two major action RPGs to launch this year. I said it, and I stand by it. "2018. We are nearing the end of the list, and we are finally at the point where I got into the Switch properly due to more indies, retro compilations, and other fun goodies launching this year that got me addicted to the console. In fact, the 1-Up was a timed exclusive to the Switch for a while, and it's none other than the excellent SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. I normally try to refrain from putting retro compilation on these lists, since I feel if they don't go above and beyond, they'll just be a list of games with not much to them. But I truly feel Digital Eclipse made the ultimate compilation and perfect example of one with this release. Tons of obscure arcade games from SNK past, along with some NES games, most of which were ported for the first time ever here, which led to me enjoying games like Crystalis, Iron Tank, Vanguard, and Search and Rescue, creating new favorites for me to enjoy. But alongside a great lineup of fun games, you have a magnificent museum mode, covering every single SNK game pre-Neo Geo in heavy detail, including several games that are literally lost media to this day that you won't find info about anywhere else. It's one of the biggest examples of games preservation out there. I cannot recommend this compilation enough. It's on everything, super good on every platform, but the Xbox version does have baseball stars on NES if you care for that game. Otherwise, they're all the same, and this is a must-buy on any system, and easily the best retro compilation of the entire decade for me. But not only did retro gaming win me over with a great compilation of the oldest year, but an excellent new throwback to NES games as well, in the form of Bloodstained Curse the Moon. As a tribute to the 8-bit Castlevanias, Curse the Moon not only follows the trilogy up super well, but far exceeds them easily. The amount of times I replay this game to completion is way too many times to count, and whether it's the amazing chiptunes, the great level designs, the high replay value and multiple endings, and the fun skills you can obtain, this short game ended up being more engaging for me than full-fledged Metroidvania that launched in 2019. Even with a sequel out as of last year, I can't help but prefer this first one a lot more, since it just nails everything right the first time around, and is one I'll gladly be passing down to my friends and family for generations to come. Absolutely a modern classic, and Inti Creates did a bang-up job with this one, and I'm really excited to see the future of these kinds of games. And that leads us to the final lead of this roundup, 2019, the darkest year in my life in a long, long while. Multiple losses of friends and family, and tons of stressful life events that turned my world upside down. But there were still great games to enjoy throughout all of it, and I finally got into PC gaming properly this year. So let's look at the final 2 games of this list, shall we? For my one-up, it's none other than Pokemon Sword. Yes, this may be shocking, as the only mainline Pokemon game to make the list in any capacity, despite some of the best ones in the series coming out this decade. Despite some controversy this game had during pre-release, for better or worse, I ended up buying the game, giving it a playthrough with an open mind, and I liked it a ton more than any of the 3DS games. Several factors account for that, but 3 words are the key. Quality of life. That's the ticket to what makes Pokemon Sword so much fun for me. It removes every nagging gripe I had about the series' mechanics in general, making it a perfect jumping in point for competitive play. Stupid level grinds to 100? No longer an issue. Use candies and you can make the team battle ready in no time. Cheating Battle Tower AI? Well, they toned it down a bit and made it fun while not being brain dead easy, so you can still have a challenge without feeling like you're playing against God all the time. But most importantly of all comes from the ranked battles, which are split up into tiers and are finally balanced and fun enough for me to be very enjoyable. The barrier of entry has evaporated, and while the main game is still a fun, relaxing romp, it doesn't have much fat to it, and I find that to be a big relief after the sheer amount of bloat and cutscene garbage that plagued Generation 7, and the toned down easy difficulty Generation 6, along with the lack of any sort of world building. That being said, there was still some gripes I have with general aspects, such as lackluster wild area and the raids, though the expansion pass in 2020 fixed those issues for me, and made them more fun. But this is a 2019 list, so I'm just covering the base game, and as a result, Pokemon Sword manages to make the runner-up position, since I know they could do this, but a lot better right out of the gate. Here's hoping future Pokemon games take the best aspects from this entry and apply it to the future, so we can get a game that makes all fans happy. Will Pokemon Legends be that game? Or will it be Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl? Who knows? But now, the final game of the countdown. My game of the year for 2019 was none other than Blaster Master Zero 2. Another Inti Creates game, this sequel to the fun retro revival came out of nowhere in a Nintendo Direct and blew me away. The excellent gameplay from the first Zero game is intact and greatly expanded upon. Music is even better than before, and it was always super duper excellent. The level design is all brand new and super creative. Considering how the only good Blastmaster games prior to this one just stuck to the first game's progression and played it safe, to see a sequel, a well-made one at that, try out cool new ideas with tons of fun levels that works, that's amazing! But even better, tons of fan service, and not the bad kind. References to Sunsoft games galore here. Of course, with tons of nods to Blastmaster and Metafight canon as a whole, there's super huge nerdy fans like me that have had fun finding each of the references to other Sunsoft games like Trip World and Waku Waku 7. But even as I managed to miss a few of the ones they snuck in here and there, I still had fun finding out which secrets and references they hid in. And with all that, it ended on a magnificent cliffhanger that had me waiting in hope and pushing me to keep going day by day to see the day when it would finally be resolved. And now, July 29th is that day, as Blaster Master Zero 3 was finally announced lately. This is how you follow up a retro revival properly, and I'm so excited to see how the climactic finale unfolds for the Zero series. Will it be my game of the year 2021? Maybe it will be.
And finally, we have finished the best games of the decade, which is a very long journey. I'm thankful if you stuck by and listened to me ramble about at least 20 different games over the past decade. Just a lot of good stuff came out, and even the worst years like 2016 and whatnot had some good gems I still come back to often. But then there was other gems where I liked the game so much and it was my game of the year and I haven't even beaten it or gone close to the end, like 3D Game Heroes, but I'll remedy that someday. Nevertheless, I still think it's enjoyable enough that you should give most, if not all, the games on my list a try if you haven't already, because some of these are available on almost every platform available, while a few like Super Mystery Dungeon and whatnot are, limited to the 3DS. So yeah, that'll do it, and I can finally put this overdue video behind me. We went over the best games of the decade, and speaking of which, since I promised, here is a list of my rankings for the best normal Game of the Year games. I'm not putting honorable mentions on here because that'd be a mess. This is just my favorites ranked from best to worst, but they're all good. In terms of the games I picked, you know the winner. It's Super Mystery Dungeon. That's very obvious. I constantly gush about it. I'm planning my retrospective, even though it's taking forever. I am still working on them, I promise. But yeah, hopefully you find something new to enjoy, or at least find this interesting. But with that video out of the way, we do have more business to attend to. Not overdue business, just good old arcade business. Next time I'll cover attempt to a viewer request as I pick a similar game, and you'll find out what that game is next time. Bye!